Coming to paperback and e-readers from SJS Direct, Isis, House of Isis, the goddess next door takes on a hustling Hotep high priestess in Harlem in this Afrocentric Isis series adventure. Pre-order Isis, House of Isis on Amazon.com today. I was watching a diversity in comics video and a Yellow Flash video, and they were talking about this issue of Supergirl, which featured this so-called non-binary character who was neither male nor female. Now, as they were talking about the identity politics that was presented in this issue of Supergirl, I began to notice the racism featured in this issue of Supergirl. Now, in this issue of Supergirl, there are two black male characters. There's the black male character who's very effeminate in the opening panels of the comic, and then they introduce this non-binary black male later on in the comic. And the message and the undertones of this comic are very racist because what they are saying in the undertones of the message of this comic is that in order for any black male to be in the presence of a white heterosexual female like Supergirl, they have to be either homosexual, like the effeminate man featured early in the comic, or asexual, like the non binary character introduced in the Supergirl comic. And that's racist because what they're saying is that in order for these black men to be around a heterosexual female, they cannot be considered someone who has any sort of sexuality or can be considered a possible sexual mate to Supergirl. So they're saying that this white woman, in order to have black men around her, these men have to be either emasculated or they have to be homosexual. And that's racist to say that because what the message is being sent in the undertones of this comic is that that in order for this Supergirl to be considered being able to help black men, those black men have to have no masculinity and they cannot be considered someone that Supergirl could consider sexually attractive or possibly being sexually attractive too. Now these SJWs believe that this comic, which featured this so-called non-binary character, was going to be a powerful statement on diversity. No, it was a powerful statement in their racism because when it comes down to SJWs, they are the biggest racists in the room. And they have a clear issue with black men. And that's shown in many of their comics. And it was shown to me in that issue of Supergirl just by looking at the panels presented there, their feelings of insecurity and inadequacy as related to black males and black male sexuality. I mean, I can even take a look at issues like of their Marvel's new Luke Cage comic, and again, I see the same issues regarded to black male sexuality and black masculinity in that they turned Luke Cage into a guy with a dad bod, and they tried to minimize his sexuality and his masculine energy by downplaying his musculature and downplaying his manners of manhood. They took all the things that made Luke Cage popular away and tried to emasculate him in that Luke Cage comic in the same way they are trying to emasculate this non-binary man in the Supergirl comic because the SJW is uncomfortable with black manhood, they're uncomfortable with black masculinity, and because they're uncomfortable and insecure about black manhood and masculinity, they always look to find efforts to minimize black manhood and masculinity in their comics. And they show this in this Supergirl comic by making this boy a so-called non-binary person because they feel this is the type of black man they would feel comfortable around. A black man who has no sexuality, a black man who has no muscles, a black man who has no sense of manhood whatsoever. And the SJWs think that, again, they are presenting diversity, when in actuality they're being passive aggressive in presenting racism to people. Passive in that they're saying that they're promoting diversity by promoting a so called non binary character, but aggressive in presenting an image of an emasculated black man in a mainstream comic book, and then saying that this is supposed to be a image related to an image of black manhood. This is a slap in the face to black men, but most black men won't see it because they're not taking that critical look at this issue of Supergirl. And if you take a really hard and critical look at this issue of Supergirl, you can clearly see the racism behind the pages of that issue of Supergirl. When I took a look at that issue, as I was watching those videos, I was deeply angered by that presentation in that comic because it showed how racist these SJWs truly are, and how these SJWs will sit there and pretend like they're so noble and they're making these great strides for diversity when they're actually promoting the same type of racism that Ku Klux Klansmen and white supremacists promoted in their caricaturized media of coons, brutes, Uncle Toms, and other black caricatures designed to promote stereotypes about black men in their propaganda pieces of literature and film. That's what I saw in that issue of Supergirl, a repackaging of old Jim Crow stereotypes in a brand new box. And this is a type of media that most comic fans need to go out and protest, because this is the type of media that promotes and breathes brand new life into old stereotypes about black men, old stereotypes that the comic book industry has been fighting for years against, because they've wanted to present more positive images of black people in media. However, these SJWs, they take us all the way back to the Jim Crow era with stories like this issue of Supergirl and Marvel's recent failed diversity campaign, because these campaigns are all designed to present stereotypes of people as minorities, but not present us the human types we have seen in comics over the last 40 years. What I see that them with these so-called diversity heroes is characters that should have been relegated to the relics of outdated media like after school specials brought back to life, and media that we have long since outgrown. Now, I look at this issue of Supergirl and the racism featured in it, and this is something that is a watershed moment for DC Comics, because it shows me that the cancer that infested Marvel and led to Marvel collapsing as a publishing brand is now starting to infest DC. And if Diane Dido and Jim Lee don't really take some action to do something about this SJW cancer, it's going to eat up DC and destroy DC in the same way it did Marvel. And if that's the case, then the comic book industry can consider itself on its way to going out of business. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct fantasy titles like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.